Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're tackling something that feels almost like common knowledge, right? This idea of the plant-based diet.
Right. It's been pushed for years now as the gold standard for heart health.
Yeah.
You hear it everywhere.
Eat your veggies, cut back on meat, your heart will thank you. Simple enough, seems logical, makes perfect sense on the surface.
And, fundamentally that advice isn't wrong. If you look at traditional diets like the Mediterranean diet packed with whole plant foods, well, the evidence is there.
Loads of evidence there, decades worth.
Absolutely, decades of it showing protection. But the problem is the food world around us has completely shifted since that advice first solidified.
Yeah, the label plant-based has kind of been, co-opted, hasn't it?
Yeah.
By, the big food industry players.
Completely. You walk into any supermarket now, and what do you see? You've got vegan pastries, meat substitutes engineered in labs, convenient prepackaged meals, all technically carrying that plant-based flag.
Which creates this huge confusion for people trying to eat better. Is that packaged store-brand vegan sausage roll doing the same thing for your heart as, say, a simple bowl of lentils and brown rice?
Intuitively, you'd probably say no, wouldn't you? But science needed to actually measure that difference, put some numbers on it.
And that brings us right to this paradox we wanted to explore today. What if that plant-based label, what if it's actually functionally irrelevant for your heart health in some cases?
Or even worse.
Right. What if simply swapping out, say, a beef burger for an ultra-processed veggie burger doesn't help at all? Or maybe even actively elevates your cardiovascular risk? Okay, let's unpack this, because there's this really groundbreaking new study suggesting we've been looking at diet quality all wrong, kind of one-dimensionally.
That's our mission today. We're diving deep into this pivotal research just published in the Lancet Regional Health Europe, and the team behind it used an enormous data set, the French NutriNet-Santé cohort.
Huge numbers involved here.
Over 63,000 adults, tracked for, on average, 9.1 years. And their goal was pretty audacious. They wanted to move beyond just grouping foods as plant or animal. They aimed to create an integrated approach, assessing not one, but three critical dimensions of a person's diet simultaneously.
So we're going to try and understand those three dimensions today, the ones that seem to dictate whether a diet is really heart healthy. First, the classic one, the balance of plant versus animal foods.
Standard stuff.
Second, the basic nutritional quality of those foods, high fiber, low sugar, good fats, versus the opposite.
Also important, obviously.
And third, but the one that really seems to be the game changer here, the degree of industrial processing these foods undergo. How much have they been, messed with?
Right, and we really have to start with why this research is just so urgent. The cardiovascular diseases, they aren't some small side issue. They are the leading cause of death worldwide.
The #1 killer globally.
Exactly. In 2021, they were responsible for something like 21% of total global mortality. So preventing this isn't just about individual wellness choices. It's arguably the single biggest public health priority we have.
And for a long time, it feels like researchers were maybe working with separate pieces of the puzzle. You had these two distinct lines of evidence building up.
That's a good way to put it. On one hand, it was becoming clearer and clearer. High consumption of ultra-processed foods, UPFs, significantly increases your risk for cardiovascular disease. That link was solidifying.
Okay, fact number 1, ultra-processed is bad for the heart.
Then fact number 2, also well established, diets that are high in nutritionally sound plant-based products, things like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, generally reduce that cardiovascular risk.
Okay, fact number 2, whole plants are good for the heart. Seems simple enough.
The issue really cropped up when these two facts started colliding in people's actual shopping carts and on their dinner plates. How do you assess a diet that's, say, technically rich in plant-derived ingredients, but relies heavily on industrial formulation to get there?
Like that vegan ready meal or the fortified breakfast cereal.
Precisely. Earlier studies, epidemiological work, tended to measure these things separately. They might focus just on the nutritional score of the plant someone ate, or maybe just the total amount of processed food in their diet.
But not the interaction.
Exactly. They often failed to capture the synergy or maybe the collision between the nutritional quality and the processing level of those plant foods.
And that failure to see the whole picture That's what this French research team really set out to correct.
Yes, their core objective was to get past that simple plant versus animal divide by adding these two extra crucial filters. They looked at nutritional quality, is the food inherently good for you, high fiber, low sugar, etc. And then, the big one, the level of industrial processing involved. How much has it been altered?
And they could do this because of the data they had access to.
Absolutely. The data source itself, the NutriNet-Santé cohort, is just fantastic for this kind of work. It's massive, obviously, but it's also unique because the participants, who are all volunteers, very dedicated, provide incredibly detailed dietary data.
Not just ticking boxes.
No, far from it. They submit 3 comprehensive 24-hour dietary records, and these are collected repeatedly over the entire follow-up period, sometimes years apart. So you get a really rich picture of their long-term eating habits.
And that level of detail is what's vital, isn't it? It's not just someone saying, oh, I ate bread. It allows the researchers to drill down into, well, what kind of bread? What were the ingredients? And crucially, how was it actually made?
Exactly right. To handle all this incredible detail, the researchers meticulously categorized something like 3,500 different food items that the participants reported eating.
Wow, 3,500 items.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking. They used the internationally recognized Novier classification system. We'll talk more about that. But they adapted it specifically for the French food context. This allowed them to accurately trace a food's journey, essentially from the farm to the fork, and understand precisely how processing changes the food itself, its structure, its matrix.
It gives you that granularity you need.
It provides the level of nuance required to really pinpoint which components of our modern diet are driving up cardiovascular risk and which are protective.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of how they actually built this scoring system, because this is where the real ingenuity of this study comes in, I think. They started with some established building blocks, right? These things called plant-based diet indices, or PDI.
That's right. They didn't reinvent the wheel entirely. They started with 2 initial index scores based on previous work, primarily by Satija and colleagues. First, there's the Healthy Plant-Based Diet Index. Let's maybe call this the nutrient tracker for simplicity.
Okay, the nutrient tracker, what does that track?
This index basically gives points for consuming the good stuff. Whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, vegetable oils, even tea and coffee. These are all the plant foods that have been consistently linked in research to lower risk of diseases like heart disease, diabetes, etc.
Got it. So more whole plants equals a higher score on the nutrient tracker.
Exactly. And then logically, they track the flip side, the Unhealthy Plant-Based Diet Index. We could call this one the nutrient detractors.
Nutrient detractors, okay. And this measures.
This index gives points for consuming plant-based foods generally associated with higher disease risk. So we're talking things like fruit juices, which are often high in sugar without the fiber-sweetened drinks, refined grains like white bread or pasta, potatoes, especially processed forms like fries, and sugary desserts.
Right, so even though they're technically from plants, they're not the health-promoting kind. Up to this point, this feels like pretty standard nutritional science, doesn't it? Score the good plants, score the bad plants.
It is. This is evaluating the nutritional quality based on the source. The real innovation, the crucial multiplier, as you called it earlier, comes with that second layer, applying the processing filter using the Novier classification system.
Now, Novier is different, isn't it? It's not about nutrients per se.
Not at all. That's the key thing to grasp. Novier categorizes foods based purely on the extent and purpose of the industrial processing they undergo. It's not looking at the fat content or the vitamin C level. It's looking at how much the food has been transformed from its original state and why.
But I can imagine classifying 3,500 different foods this way must be incredibly complex. How do you draw the line between, say, minimally processed and ultra-processed? Especially when foods are becoming more complex. Isn't there a risk of subjectivity creeping in?
That's a really important question, and the researchers using Novia have put a lot of effort into creating clear, objective criteria. The strength of Novia lies in its 4 distinct groups. Group 1. These are unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Think raw fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, beans, lentils, but also fresh meat, fish, eggs, milk. Minimal processing might include drying, crushing, grinding, freezing, boiling things that don't fundamentally alter the food's nature or add industrial ingredients.
Okay, so basically whole foods as you'd find them.
Yeah.
Or with very simple preparation.
Exactly. Then group 2 is processed culinary ingredients. These are things extracted from group 1 foods or from nature, used in kitchens to prepare meals: salt, sugar, oils, butter, vinegar. You don't typically eat them on their own.
Ingredients for cooking, basically.
Right. Group 3 is processed foods. This is where it gets a bit more complex. These are typically made by adding group 2 ingredients like salt, sugar, oil to group 1 foods. Think simple breads made with just flour, water, salt, yeast, cheeses, canned vegetables or fish in brine or oil, cured meats, usually relatively few ingredients, and the processing methods are often traditional canning, bottling, fermentation.
Still recognizable as derived from whole foods, mostly.
Generally, yes. But then we get to group 4, ultra-processed foods, UPFs. This is a category that's really exploded in recent decades. These aren't just modified foods. They're typically industrial formulations made mostly or entirely from substances extracted from foods like fats, starches, sugars, proteins, or synthesized in labs like flavor enhancers, colors, emulsifiers.
So ingredients you wouldn't typically find in a home kitchen cupboard.
Precisely. Think additives to make the product hyperpalatable, or ingredients like hydrogenated oils, modified starches, protein isolates. The processing often involves multiple industrial steps like extrusion, molding, pre-frying. These foods are designed for convenience, long shelf life, and high profitability.
And this group 4, the UPF category, is critical here. Because when we think of ultra-processed, maybe we picture obvious junk food like chips and soda. But Novia captures things that might try to wear a health halo, right? Things labeled plant-based or whole grain.
Exactly. That's the crucial insight. Think about some industrial wholemeal breads. They start with whole grain flour, healthy, group 1, but then they often contain emulsifiers, added sugars or fats, preservatives to extend shelf life and create a specific texture that pushes them into group 4.
Or those store-bought soups, even vegetable ones.
Often group 4 if they contain modified starches, flavor enhancers, etc. Ready-made pasta dishes, many breakfast cereals, even those marketed as high fiber or whole grain if they're extruded shapes with added sugars and flavorings. Fruit-based sweetened drinks or sodas, savory biscuits, packaged cakes, confectionery. Many vegan meat substitutes also fall squarely into this UPF category due to their complex formulations with isolates and additives.
Okay, so by combining that first layer, the healthy versus unhealthy plant index, with the second layer, the Novia processing level, the researchers could create these 4 really specific, novel dietary indices. You mentioned they created scores.
Yes. They combine these factors to create integrated scores for each participant, ranging from 18 up to 180. This allowed them to rank individuals based on their adherence to 4 very distinct dietary patterns. This is the real rehook, the core of their analysis. Let's try and give these 4 categories clearer names, maybe building on what we discussed.
Good idea. Let's make them memorable.
Okay, category 1, combining the healthy plant-based diet index, lots of good plants, with predominantly unprocessed, minimally processed foods, Novia Group 1. Let's stick with calling this the gold standard.
The gold standard. Makes sense. This is the diet rich in nutritious, minimally processed plants. Fresh fruits, raw veg, whole grains cooked simply at home, legumes, nuts. This is basically what traditional dietary advice has always pointed towards.
Exactly. Category 2. This is where it gets tricky. High score on the healthy plant-based diet index, nutritious ingredients. But these foods are predominantly ultra-processed, Novia Group 4. We called this the deception earlier, and I think that fits.
The deception, yeah, I like that. This is the packaged whole grain cereal that's also loaded with sugar and additives, or maybe the pre-made veggie burger that starts with soy or vegetables but ends up full of stabilizers, salt, and artificial flavors. Looks healthy, maybe isn't.
Precisely. Category 3. Now we flip the nutrient side. High score on the unhealthy plant-based diet index, refined grains, sugary stuff. But these foods are still mainly unprocessed, minimally processed. We called this the gray zone.
The gray zone. Okay, so this might be a diet heavy on, say, white rice or potatoes cooked simply at home, maybe some fruit juice, but lacking in diverse vegetables and whole grains. Not optimal nutrition, but not heavily industrialized either. And you mentioned the study found this group interesting.
Yes, spoiler alert, this group didn't show statistically significant protection or harm in terms of cardiovascular outcomes. It was sort of neutral.
Interesting. Okay, and finally, category 4. The double whammy, high score on the unhealthy plant-based diet index, poor nutrients and DOE. These foods are predominantly ultra-processed. We call this the worst offender.
The worst offender. Perfect. This is your classic highly formulated junk food crisps, chocolate bars, cookies, sweetened soft drinks derived from plant extracts, many sugary breakfast cereals. It combines poor baseline nutritional quality with heavy industrial formulation. This combination, as we'll see, is really what we need to keep an eye on.
Okay, The methodology is quite sophisticated, breaking diet down in this new way. But the real power of this deep dive comes when we look at what actually happened to the people eating these different diets over those 9+ years. Here's where it gets really interesting. The results paint a very clear picture, distinguishing sharply between these four groups.
They really do. Let's start with the best case scenario. The outcomes for the gold standard group. Those eating a diet high in healthy, unprocessed, or minimally processed plant foods.
The traditional healthy diet.
Exactly. Individuals who scored highest in adherence to this gold standard diet saw really remarkable protection against heart problems. Compared to the group with the lowest adherence to this pattern, they experienced a 44% lower incidence of coronary heart disease.
Wow, 44% lower risk. That's substantial.
It's huge. And for overall cardiovascular disease, which includes things like stroke as well, the risk reduction was also very significant. 32% lower risk compared to the lowest adherence group.
So the takeaway there is pretty clear. The traditional advice holds up if you're eating whole, minimally processed plant foods.
Precisely. The foundation is solid, provided the food isn't heavily industrialized. Now, let's swing to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the worst offender group.
Right, the unhealthy and ultra-processed plant-based diet. The sugary cereals, the processed snacks.
The consequences here were equally, if not more, staggering, but in the opposite direction. People with the highest adherence to this dietary pattern suffered a 46% higher incidence of coronary heart disease.
Higher, a 46% increase in risk.
Yes, a higher risk compared to those least adherent to this pattern. And for overall cardiovascular disease, it was a 38% higher incidence.
That's alarming. That's a massive risk increase associated with these foods, even if they technically originate from plants.
It is. And critically, the researchers specifically highlighted that this association, the harm linked to the worst offender diet, was actually the strongest statistical association observed in the entire study.
Stronger than the protective effect of the gold standard diet.
Yes. It was a more powerful predictor of developing heart disease than almost any other dietary metric they looked at. The combination of poor nutritional quality and ultra-processing seems particularly detrimental.
Okay, that's a major finding. But maybe the most paradigm-shifting result, the one that really challenges conventional thinking and, frankly, a lot of food marketing, belongs to the deception group.
Ah, yes, the healthy but ultra-processed plant-based diet.
This is the one that trips people up, I think. We often assume, perhaps encouraged by labels, that as long as the ingredients are good whole grains, vegetables, legumes, the benefits will sort of automatically follow through, regardless of the packaging or preparation method.
It's an easy assumption to make. But the data told a very different story. High adherence to this healthy ingredients but ultra-processed diet showed no statistically significant association with the lower risk of cardiovascular disease. None.
Let that sink in. So eating a diet based on, say, packaged whole grain bread with additives, processed veggie burgers, and maybe some fortified cereals, even though the base ingredients are considered healthy, offered no measurable heart protection compared to those eating the least of this type of diet.
That's what the statistics showed. It seems the level of industrial processing effectively acted like a nutritional counteragent. It appeared to completely cancel out, or at least statistically obscure, the expected protective role of the inherently healthy ingredients within those foods.
So if you were getting your healthy plant foods primarily through these highly processed convenience items, you were, statistically speaking, no better off in terms of heart disease risk than someone who wasn't making any particular effort to prioritize those ingredients.
Based on these findings, yes, the processing seemed to neutralize the benefit.
Which leads to a really powerful conclusion. The processing level isn't just a minor detail. It seems to be functionally overriding the nutritional quality of the ingredients, for better or worse.
That appears to be the case. It overrides the potential good from healthy ingredients, as we saw with the deception group, and it dramatically amplifies the harm from unhealthy ingredients, as we saw with the worst offender group having the highest risk. Remember the gray zone group?
Right, the unhealthy ingredients, but minimally processed, like white rice, potatoes.
That group showed no significant harmful association. It was the combination with ultra-processing in the worst offender group that sent the risk soaring. The UPF component seems to be the primary risk accelerator here. So what does this all mean? Well, these findings really force us, public health bodies, doctors, dietitians, and individuals to evolve our thinking and our advice immediately.
It's not enough anymore to just say, eat more plants or reduce animal products.
It's absolutely not. That advice is incomplete and potentially misleading in the current food environment. The recommendations really need to adopt what the researchers called a 3D vision. We need to advocate for minimally processed plant foods as the explicit primary target, alongside reducing animal products and, crucially, reducing all ultra-processed foods, regardless of their source.
The researchers did some interesting substitution analyses too, didn't they? Trying to model what happens if you swap one type of food for another.
Yes, they did. And it reinforces the point about processing. They found that if participants hypothetically replace 10% of their energy intake from animal-based ultra-processed foods, think processed meats, cheesy snacks, with plant-based non-ultra-processed foods.
Like swapping sausages for lentils.
Exactly. If they made that swap, the calculated risk for cardiovascular disease decreased significantly. That makes intuitive sense. You're swapping something generally considered harmful for something generally considered beneficial. Bad out, good in.
Okay, that tracks. But what about swapping within the plant-based category?
This is where it gets really telling. They also modeled replacing 10% of energy from plant-based ultra-processed foods, say, those processed veggie burgers or sugary cereals we talked about, with plant-based non-ultra-processed foods, like swapping the veggie burger for plain beans or the cereal for oats.
So swapping a processed plant food for a whole plant food, that should lower risk, right? Seems like an obvious win.
You'd think so. But interestingly, this substitution was not significantly associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular or coronary heart diseases in their models.
Wait, hang on. That seems deeply counterintuitive. If I consciously swap my highly processed vegan cereal for simple, unprocessed rolled oats for breakfast, why wouldn't that significantly lower my heart disease risk, according to this model?
It's a complex finding, and there are a few potential reasons. Firstly, a 10% energy substitution is actually quite small in the context of an entire diet. It might simply not be a large enough change to register a statistically significant effect in this kind of observational modeling, especially given the powerful background noise of the rest of the diet.
Okay, maybe the dose wasn't enough in the model.
Possibly. But perhaps more importantly, it might highlight that the detrimental effects of consuming ultra-processed foods go beyond just displacing healthier options. When you eat UPFs regularly, you're not just missing out on good stuff, you're potentially engaging with a food system that's actively altering things like your gut microbiome, your satiety signaling, maybe even low-grade inflammation levels, in ways that aren't easily undone by a single small swap.
So it's not just about adding good stuff back in. You might need to fundamentally remove the negative influence of the processing itself.
That could be the implication. To see a significant benefit, you might need a more wholesale shift away from the UPF dietary pattern rather than just tweaking 10% at the margins. It underscores that the issue might be less about the absence of good nutrients in UPFs and more about the presence of harmful characteristics introduced by the processing.
Okay, that makes more sense. So let's dig into those mechanisms. Why does the minimally processed route, the gold standard, win so convincingly? Why does a handful of raw almonds seem to protect your heart better than, say, a packaged, flavored, processed energy bar made from almond constituents?
It really comes down to the integrity of the food itself, what nutritionists often call the food matrix. When plant foods are eaten whole or minimally processed, they deliver their nutrients and compounds within their natural structure.
Like a natural slow-release capsule.
Exactly. Think about dietary fiber. In whole foods, it's intact. Fiber is a powerhouse. We know it physically helps lower LDL cholesterol, the bad kind. It also dramatically improves glycemic control because it slows down how quickly sugars from the food are absorbed into your bloodstream, preventing those sharp spikes and crashes.
And it's not just about fiber, is it? It's the whole package.
Absolutely. You're getting a symphony of beneficial compounds working together. High concentrations of antioxidants like vitamin C and E, various polyphenols, plus essential minerals like potassium and magnesium, all crucial for cardiovascular health. These compounds actively fight oxidative stress and chronic inflammation, which are known underlying drivers of heart disease.
And you mentioned the gut microbiota earlier. Fiber plays a role there, too.
A huge role. When that intact fiber reaches your large intestine, it becomes food for your beneficial gut bacteria. They ferment it, and this process produces incredibly important compounds called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
Like butyrate.
Butyrate is a key one, yes. It's a primary fuel source for the cells lining your colon, helping to maintain a strong, healthy gut barrier. But SCFAs like acetate and propionate also get absorbed into circulation and have systemic benefits. They positively influence lipid profiles, how your body handles fats and glucose metabolism, helping to manage blood sugar more effectively. Plus, you get all this without the baggage of industrial additives or contaminants.
Okay, so that's the protective side. Now let's flip to the harmful mechanisms of ultra-processed foods, UPFs. We know they often have high levels of added sugar, unhealthy fats, and sodium, the usual suspects. But what else is going on? You mentioned the food matrix being destroyed.
Yes, the processing itself fundamentally disrupts that natural food matrix. Let's use the classic apple versus apple juice example. The whole apple contains fiber intertwined with the sugars. When you eat it, the fiber slows sugar absorption.
Right.
But when you process it into juice, especially clarified juice, you remove most of that fiber. Now, the sugars hit your bloodstream much faster, causing a rapid spike in blood glucose and insulin that, repeated over time, can contribute to insulin resistance and metabolic problems. That destruction of the matrix also often leads to poorer satiety. The food is less filling calorie for calorie, which can easily lead to overconsumption.
And then there are the actual additives, the things that define Novia Group 4.
Exactly. UPFs are engineered for intense taste, texture, and long shelf life. This often requires ingredients rarely used in home cooking. We're talking about emulsifiers, things like carboxymethylcellulose or polysorbate 80, which help blend oil and water, but are increasingly being studied for potentially disrupting the gut microbiota balance and maybe even damaging the protective mucus layer in the intestine.
Which could potentially lead to issues like increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut and downstream inflammation.
That's a major area of ongoing research and concern, yes. Then you have artificial sweeteners, flavor enhancers, colors, thickeners, stabilizers, a whole cocktail of substances whose long-term cumulative effects on human health, especially in combination, are still not fully understood.
And the processing itself can create harmful compounds.
Yes. High-temperature processing methods used for things like chips, crisps, or some baked goods can generate contaminants like acrylamide or advanced glycation end products, AGEs. While the levels in individual foods might be low, the cumulative exposure from a diet high in UPFs could contribute to oxidative stress and inflammation over time.
So it's a combination. Poor nutrient profile, high energy density, disrupted food matrix, cocktail of additives, potential contaminants. And then there's the behavioral aspect.
Absolutely. These foods are often described as hyperpalatable. They are literally designed by food technologists to hit our bliss points for sugar, salt, and fat, making them incredibly appealing and, for some people, almost addictive. This drives overconsumption. Remember that finding.
That the worst offender group ate twice the amount of ultra-processed plant products compared to the other groups.
Exactly. It's not just that the foods themselves are problematic. They are engineered in a way that encourages you to eat more of them, creating a really vicious cycle that's hard to break.
These results are really striking, almost definitive sounding. But it's crucial, especially with nutrition science, to put them in context and acknowledge the study's limitations, right?
Absolutely essential. Science is iterative, and every study has its boundaries. The primary limitation, as is almost always the case with large-scale dietary studies like this, is that it's an observational study.
Meaning it shows links, not cause and effect.
Precisely. We see strong associations. People who eat pattern X consistently have outcome Y. But we can't definitively state, based on this study alone, that eating pattern X caused outcome Y. There could be other unmeasured lifestyle factors, genetic predispositions, or residual confounding that play a role, even though the researchers did adjust for many known factors like age, sex, smoking, physical activity, education level, and overall energy intake.
Okay, so association, not causation. That's standard for this type of research. What about the people in the study, the NutriNet-Santé cohort?
That's another point to consider. These are volunteers. People who sign up for a long-term health and nutrition study are often, on average, more health conscious, perhaps more educated, and maybe have healthier lifestyles overall than the general population. This is sometimes called healthy volunteer bias.
So could the results be skewed because the participants are already healthier than average?
It's a possibility researchers always consider. However, the study authors did address this. They compared the participants' baseline characteristics and, importantly, their consumption of ultra-processed foods, which was around 30-35% of total energy intake, to data from broader French national nutrition surveys, like the ENNS study. They found the UPF intake was actually quite similar.
So even this relatively health-conscious group was eating a significant amount of UPFs, comparable to the general population.
Yes, which suggests the findings are likely still very relevant and applicable to the wider public, at least in France and probably similar Western countries.
Okay, what about the timing? You mentioned the dietary data collection peaked around 2010.
That's a really important temporal context. The food landscape, particularly for plant-based ultra-processed foods, think sophisticated meat analogs, New types of dairy alternatives has changed dramatically since 2010. It has exploded.
So people are likely eating even more of these products now than the study participants were back then.
Very likely, yes. The researchers themselves point this out. They suggest that because the availability and consumption of UPFs have increased markedly in France and elsewhere since the main data collection period, the harmful associations they observed between UPF intake and cardiovascular disease might actually underestimate the true negative impact these foods are having on population health today.
Wow. So the already concerning findings, like that 36% increased risk in the worst offender group, could potentially be even worse if the study were replicated using current dietary data.
It's a plausible and rather sobering hypothesis. But despite these limitations, the study's internal methodology seems very strong.
They did a lot of checking.
Yes, they performed extensive sensitivity analyses to test the robustness of their findings. They tried excluding participants who were diagnosed with cardiovascular disease very early in the follow-up, in case their pre-existing condition influenced their diet. They rigorously adjusted for body mass index, BMI, in different ways. They even tested alternative ways of constructing the PDI and processing scores.
And the main results held up.
They did. The associations remained consistent across these different analytical approaches, which gives us much more confidence in the internal validity of their novel integrated scores and the overall conclusions.
So connecting this back to the bigger picture of nutrition research, what's the main added value here? How does this move the conversation forward?
I think it achieves its goal beautifully. It provides a much more comprehensive and nuanced evaluation of diet than previous methods typically allowed. Earlier studies might have stratified results by UPF intake after looking at a healthy diet score, or they used simple substitution models. This study integrated the plant-based dimension and the processing dimension into a single score from the outset. That PDI food processing integrated score is the real innovation.
And it helps explain findings from other studies, too.
Absolutely. It aligns perfectly with observations from other large cohorts, like the EPIC study in the Netherlands you mentioned. That study found that high adherence to a generally healthy dietary pattern, like the Mediterranean diet or other healthy indexes, only really translated into significantly better survival rates among people who are also low consumers of ultra-processed foods.
So this new French study provides the mechanism. It shows why that happens.
Exactly. It suggests that the level of processing acts almost like a dampening field, capable of offsetting or nullifying the expected protective health effects of otherwise healthy dietary components or patterns if UPF consumption is high. The benefits of eating well can be easily undermined by the simultaneous consumption of industrially formulated foods. Hashtag Outrex outro.
So after diving deep into this, the central lesson seems incredibly clear, doesn't it? Don't let that plant-based marketing claim lull you into a false sense of security.
Not at all. These findings really equip you, the listener, with a much sharper lens for evaluating your food choices. They confirm that focusing only on whether a food originally came from a plant or an animal is, frankly, an outdated and potentially misleading metric for judging its impact on your cardiovascular health in today's food world.
The era of just looking for that green leaf symbol or the vegan label as a proxy for health is, well, it needs to be over. The true measure of a heart-healthy diet isn't just the source, but critically, the journey that food took, how much factory floor was involved between the farm and your plate. We need that 3D view.
And for researchers, the path forward is also clearer. Future studies really need to dig into the specific long-term impacts of different categories of plant-based UPFs, especially these newer, highly sophisticated meat and dairy alternatives that are rapidly filling supermarket shelves. We need more data on their specific additives, their unique food matrix effects compared to both whole plant foods and traditional animal products.
But for you, the individual standing in the grocery aisle or planning your meals today, the actionable advice really distills down to one clear priority, doesn't it?
It does. If you're aiming to improve your health, particularly your heart health, the most effective strategy seems to be focusing relentlessly on maximizing your intake of nutritious, minimally processed foods. That naturally means increasing your consumption of whole plants. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds in their least altered forms.
It's about prioritizing simplicity.
Exactly. And that simple principle translates into thinking critically about what's actually in your pantry or your shopping cart right now. Ask yourself, what highly processed item, maybe one that I even thought was healthy, is sitting on my shelf that could be replaced with its simpler, less processed counterpart?
like reading the ingredient list.
Absolutely. Look at that list. Are there ingredients on there with chemical-sounding names you don't recognize or wouldn't use in your own kitchen? Is that packaged, often sugary, fruit-flavored breakfast cereal really worth it? Or could it be swapped for simple, plain, whole oats or muesli you mix yourself?
Or that convenient bottle of salad dressing.
Is that ready-made dressing, often loaded with gums, emulsifiers, sugars, and refined oils, really worth the maybe 5 or 10 minutes it takes to whisk up a simple vinaigrette with olive oil, vinegar, mustard, salt, and pepper?
The evidence from this study and converging lines of research is becoming overwhelming. The fewer industrial steps a food takes to get from the field to your plate, and generally the shorter and more recognizable the ingredient list, the better off your heart and likely your overall health will be.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.